So this week's political education is on don't the rich deserve to keep most of their money? And spoiler, the answer is no. So when we're talking about this subject, what we're mainly talking about is taxation. And there's several arguments for it, and there's several arguments against it. So today we're kind of going to go through those arguments. First, looking at the arguments against them, and then looking at the arguments for taxation, sorry. So against taxation and then for taxation. So to start, the arguments for the rich. So they earned that money through hard work and innovation. So common examples are like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, LeBron James, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, all of those people. They say that they earned their money through hard work and innovation. That is debatable, but we'll get into that later. The second one is it is an incentive and helps bring the best in new technology. We see this on the internet all the time. A lot of leftists will say socialism is when no iPhone, as kind of like a meme joke for that argument. And then the main argument is something that we'll mainly be going over today is taxation is theft. And this is the libertarians' favorite go-to argument. It's their gotcha argument. And we will spend a lot of time today kind of deconstructing that argument and then finding out why it's not correct. So the first argument that I want to briefly go over is that they earn their money. That's just not the case. So Jeff Bezos, founder and main shareholder of Amazon, he had this huge space race with Elon Musk, and during that time, he stepped down of CEO of Amazon, and that company ran completely fine without him. And he still makes the most from that company. What really makes that company great is the million amount of workers that work that and do that labor, and that is what makes the money, not necessarily his hard work and dedication to the company. Another really big example is Warren Buffett. He's an investor. He doesn't produce anything. I mean, you can say that he produces profit, but what is profit? It's nothing. It's not a tangible thing for society. All his money comes from profits of businesses, as he has nothing to do with other than giving capital to. So without the labor of the employees, the top 1% would not have the ability to have the amount of wealth that they have today. It kind of reminds me of a Kwame Ture quote that he did in a lecture of 1992, where he said, in a capitalist society, the people that are considered successful are the people who consume the most, but they produce the least. Just to kind of sum up that argument. So the first question that I kind of wanted to ask you guys kind of early on is, what other myths do you commonly see as a justification for why the rich earned their money, and why is it a myth? So I'll go ahead and do breakout rooms. We'll just do it for this one's kind of a simple. Oh, wow. This one's kind of a simple one, so we'll just spend a couple minutes on it. And actually, since there's not that many people here, do you guys suggest maybe just doing it all in one big group?
Yeah,
that would be cool with me.
Awesome. So
breakout rooms are gonna have like partners.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. So okay, whenever you guys want, you guys can jump in and do stack or raise your hand. Nick.
So I think that this one is like one of the most important things for us to answer for a lot of working class individuals who hold more conservative views, and it really is particularly important for us when we're trying to get them to take actions that will improve workers' rights and workers' conditions. And the reason why I say that is that the myth of that myth that the rich earned their money is really a result of this idea that they create that value because they started the company. But it's the workers that actually produced that value, rather than the bosses. The bosses are unnecessary in production to create whatever the product or services that are being provided. And without the workers, none of their wealth that they take as a right of ownership would exist.
Would anybody else like to jump in?
I'll jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is it's almost like there is this underlying like fear that someday like the normal person might become like super rich like Jeff Bezos and then get that taken away by taxation. But I think the myth there is that they don't understand that that's not possible for the average person unless you exploit someone else's labor, right?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, it's the exploitation of labor, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later on with some of the other points, especially with taxation and the libertarian argument. Yeah, that is a good point. Anybody else? All right, we will move on here. So the argument for why taxation is theft, and this is coming from that libertarian viewpoint, is so what they believe is like the pre-tax income, the gross amount on your check or the profits of a corporation before they're taxed is a direct product of someone's labor. Therefore, it should be theirs to do what they see fit. And you can kind of see where, like, as a leftist standpoint, some of us might agree with that. So like, that's the fruit of my labor in a capitalist society is my pre-tax income. It's my wages. It's what I work for. It should be mine. And I think some people can maybe get behind that. But the problem is it's not only directly part of that, and we'll get into that later, but even part of like a Democrat standpoint, a liberal standpoint, is that their whole mantra of do your fair share kind of like frames taxes as like a civil obligation. And it suggests that taxes are a necessary evil or that taxing the rich is just more fair. But both of those perspectives can easily go back into the idea of the libertarians' view that taxation is theft if you like were to explore those perspectives. The whole argument is just based on the fact that pre-tax income does not involve the state until it jumps in to take a piece of it. But that's not really accurate. So why that argument doesn't work is that the individual and corporate income does not exist despite the state. It exists because of it. So reasons for that is the state enforces the right for firms to own private property in order to control resources that the majority do not have the means to. So this is saying that the state enforces, corporations to own property. And I keep bringing this up in meetings a lot because it's like one of the things that I've researched a lot. But Guatemala, 1954, United Fruit Company with the acceptance of the state was allowed to purchase 80% of the land in order to reap the resources from Guatemala. The state allowed that. so when the socialist president came and redistributed it, that is like, the state is the one who controls that. It's not the corporation. So another one is the state manages the labor market through immigrant education and unemployment policies. This affects both corporations and workers. So as far as like if there's a labor scarcity, the state will allow more immigrants in. The state helps educate the labor force with kindergarten through high school education. It's completely free to the public. And whenever there is huge, massive layoffs because of an economic downturn, they do have unemployment benefits for the working class, and that is all because of the state. The state also creates and enforces antitrust, contract, criminal, property, and tort laws. This is, pretty important because this is like no business really does anything without contracts. So without the ability to enforce those contracts, corporations wouldn't be able to sell certain things. They wouldn't be able to do certain services. Antitrust is a huge one. Property, like we said earlier, the state allows them to own a piece of property and then they enforce that right to own that property. And then the last one is the state provides capitalist economy with the infrastructure needed to exist. So the big example for this point is roads. So taxes pay for roads to be built. Could you imagine if roads were privatized? We wouldn't be able to go out of our driveway without having to pay a toll tax in order to drive on our road. It would be insane. So all of these points are done by using taxes. So why that argument doesn't work is because the state influences, all of the different ways that we can use income. So why should we tax the rich more? The reasons why we should not only tax the rich more, but also progressively redistribute the wealth we have to how is related to how capitalism works. So there's three main points, and I'll go over each one in different slides, but I'll go over them shortly here. So personal incomes are a kind of social product. The class inequality that results in making this social product is relational, and redistributing through taxation is actually a means of extending freedom, despite what libertarians say it's hampering your freedom by taking your income. So the first one is personal income is kind of a social product. As mentioned earlier, the state uses taxes it collects to set up systems that allow you to create an income through enforcement of laws, management of labor forces, and building of the infrastructure. I won't go over that more, but another one that I don't think McCarthy really brought up as much is that the income is created is also by like the labor market collectively, not just one person. So Jeff Bezos would not be able to run Amazon without the 1 million people that he hires. Or like in my job, I work as a sales support rep for a mining parts company. I would not be able to sell mining parts unless I had the people who worked on the mining parts and made them, and then the workers who shipped them out. So like when we're talking about like what is income, it's a collective, it's something that's collectively done or influenced by all of us in society, not just one person. I didn't get my income just because I worked hard. I got my income because there's a system in place by society that all of us work on together that I was able to input my labor in and subtract an income from. So how does that kind of social product in a capitalist society kind of keep drawing out this class inequality? So the first part is like capitalists are able to amass a great amount of wealth only because the workers are not able to do so. And they are able to do so because the state or because the capitalists in our society own the means of production, which kind of Nicholas was talking about earlier. And they use the state in order to maintain control through enforcement of property rights and contracts. So the result of this is that most of us work for someone else. We don't hire anybody, because this scenario kind of what it does is like since we don't own the means of production, we are not involved in the profits. We're only involved in the wages, because the people who own the means of production can hire us and only give us a wage, and instead of involving us in the profit. And this also creates a scenario where capitalists only hire workers if the worker will bring them a profit. So for example, like I can't get hired at Walmart for $25 an hour unless I bring a profit of more than $25 an hour. Now, we kind of know that, as a worker, we have a higher weight or a higher profit than, what our wages are. And as a worker at Walmart, we probably do a lot more than, what $15 an hour or whatever they're paying right now. But that's one of the issues that we have in this scenario. And by using higher taxes, we can kind of mitigate this effect by taking away some of the accumulation of wealth that the rich have and putting it back in the hands of the people. And then the last part is redistributing through taxes extends freedom. So the result of taxation actually furthers freedom rather than limits it. A liberal theorist, Isaiah Berlin, points out a composition of freedom in two different parts that kind of describe this point. The first part is negative freedom, which is the absence of or freedom from. For example, The 13th Amendment is a good example. So we can't be slaves in our society unless we're convicted of a crime. So we have the freedom from slavery. Another part is positive freedom, and that's the ability to do something. So positive freedom example would be, like I mentioned earlier, roads. We have the ability to drive down the street without having to pay a toll tax on, these publicly funded roads. Although part of this is without taxation, like we wouldn't have any of these freedoms. We wouldn't have the roads. We wouldn't have the ability to enforce corporations to not force us to work for, minus minimum wage. We wouldn't have the enforcement of these laws that we have built as a society. And then another thing to point out, in a capitalist society where we have such a huge wealth inequality, the working class does not have the same positive freedoms as the capitalist class. So for example, I can't go and not work for 3 months because I have bills to pay. And since I'm part of the working class, I do not have the mass amount of wealth that the rich do. So I can't just be like, I don't need to make an income for 3 months. So when we're talking about positive freedoms, like in order to like redistribute that wealth, it's to really give freedoms to everybody, not just the top 1%. So some questions for you guys. The first question is, what are the different ways that you see the state maintain capitalist control over the means of production? And we can start with that one first. And you guys can either raise your hand or go and stack. Nicholas?
One way is granting mining rights or rights of usage of the land, which is they can politically favor one company over another.
Nicholas, did you have something?
Oh, yeah, I was gonna yield to Don, but yeah, so one of the ways that like I kind of see this play out is with all of our public infrastructure, things like our internet service, right? We put all of our telecommunications, all of our internet services were initially put in and funded by tax dollars. They were funded by the public to create those systems, but then were handed over to private corporations for the maintenance and the profitization of those services. And so one of the things that we're struggling over right now is that rural communities are not being they're not being prioritized in the rollout of new technology that could benefit overall the public, right? We see this with the COVID-19 pandemic, where all of the urban centers have been propped up with these broadband internet, where we are able to get on Zoom. We're able to go to class safely without having to expose ourselves to other people, with the possibility of contracting an infectious disease that could put us in the hospital or kill us. But corporations don't have any incentive to the public good and to put out a broadband infrastructure in the rural communities around our greater Peoria metropolitan area. And so the thing is that a lot of those communities are having to make the choice of, going to school in person and having to take on that risk, because if they don't, then they're not going to be able to go to class. They don't have the reliable infrastructure, the reliable internet to go. And so the state, by denying like by not prioritizing the people over the profits of a corporation, we haven't been able to meet that need because it doesn't benefit private owners, the private owners of these companies.
Go ahead, Blake.
Another thing that the state does to help maintain capitalist control over the means of production is just by its various instruments of coercion and force in controlling working class, controlling workers, in terms of like putting down strikes, using police to, protect private property anytime it's threatened, or just basically put down or subvert popular will anytime capital or private property is threatened.
For sure, to kind of go off of both what you were saying, like with Nicholas, like I feel like that's like one of the biggest, like one of the biggest inequalities that we like kind of ignore sometimes is like we focus on class a lot, we focus on race, but we really don't focus on like infrastructure of rural versus like urban. I feel like that's like something that, we could definitely like be better at when talking about like policies of infrastructure for sure. And then with what Blake was talking about, that is like, that freedom of, or that negative freedom that Isaiah Berlin was talking about, that coercion of, the police force using the police force to kind of take away our freedoms is definitely one of those big aspects. That's why the 13th Amendment is written how it is. It's like you can't be a slave unless you're a criminal. So those are definitely good points. Does anybody else want to throw anything in before we get to the next question?
Yes, actually.
Yeah.
So I think that taxation is another way that they maintain control, simply because like a lot of like rich billionaires like evade their taxes, as we know, and a lot of times they can do it legally. Meanwhile, like smaller businesses, especially in like rural communities, have to pay much higher taxes, and with decreased spending power, they're not able to compete at the same level as big corporations. And also, like with the average person being taxed a lot more, right? That decreases their spending power and makes it harder for them to have the option to support their local communities. And instead, we end up funneling that money back to the 1%, right?
That is a really good point, and we will actually get to something similar to that later on. But go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah, I just wanted to build off of that because that's a so yeah, I mean, when we are seeing the state prioritize the interests of the capitalist class, a lot of that has to do with the people who are making decisions about the state are the capitalists themselves. They are the majority of the people who have elected positions are people who are business owners, people who are landlords, realtors, people who are Wall Street executives, and they always vote in their own interests. And so not only do they prioritize taking the majority of the value that we as workers produce, but then they do they protect their profit that they stole from us by not paying taxes at all, or by not paying a tax rate that would be higher because of their ability to contribute more and have already met their needs.
Go ahead, Blake.
Um, yeah, I had one more thing. Let me think what it was. Oh yeah, to go back to that concept of like freedom from, and what was the other one?
So
The-
negative and positive freedom.
Yeah, the negative and positive freedom. They also maintain control by what they don't offer, you know, like by increasingly decreasing the welfare state, you know, not offering like basic income, um, the opportunities that you can like the working class can use to create their own wealth, freedom, or I don't know, really just agency. Because without capital, they're not going to control the means of production under capitalism, right? It's pretty much that simple. And if the state is making you depend on, uh, you know, the wage relationship to have income, you know, to have livelihood, then you're just going to have to work for the people who already control the means of production.
That is a really good point, and that is part of my next question. But before we get to that one, Don, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that when you're talking about government, one of the biggest things is the revolving door of Congress, where congressmen can leave Congress and then become lobbyists for corporations. And it's just a revolving door. Everybody knows that if I treat them right, I will be rewarded with a job as a lobbyist afterwards. It's just bribery and kind of a hidden bribery, but it's effects anyway. That's all I have.
Yeah, that's an excellent point too. Like, so I think I read an article, and that was part of that imperialism education I did in one of the general meetings. But one thing that is really common is like for presidential cabinet members in our history, 82% of them have been in the corporate sphere either before or after their time in the presidential cabinet. So that's a really good point. But moving on with the next question, and Blake, kind of frame this up for us is, what kind of freedoms, both negative and positive, do you think are unavailable without raising taxes?
Could you explain that question more?
Yeah, so right now I think the tax rate for the top 1% is like 27%, or for people above $400,000 of earned income. So what kind of things can we implement through the state if we were to raise the tax rate to like 45%, and we were able to get like another $400 billion into the tax revenue? And like kind of think, for examples that happen like right now is, the state pays for the fire department. So you don't have the freedom or the negative freedom or you have the negative freedom to make sure that your house won't completely burn down, even though that's not, 100% accurate. But that is one thing that we have. So kind of thinking along those lines.
I mean, in terms of freedom from, I would say, we, just by slashing the military budget by 2%, we could house every single person that is currently unhoused completely at no cost to them, without even having to increase taxes. But a lot of times when people say like, oh, like we're gonna increase taxes, they think we're talking about them. we're talking about like yacht money rich. We're talking about like people who made their wealth by stealing it from us, the public, and using that money towards ends that serve our interests. So that's like one of the things that comes to mind for me.
For sure. And yes, I was talking primarily about the rich. Blake, did you want to add something?
Yeah. First thing that comes to mind for me is basically poverty and precarity. Because if we like raise taxes like that, what we're going to have, hopefully, would be like a redistribution of wealth on some level, right? And I firmly believe like we have to redistribute wealth to, I mean, I don't even know, it's controversial. I think it's pretty logical and basic, but like we have to redistribute wealth if we're going to eliminate poverty and precarity. And this is like an argument I have with more like liberally minded people, or maybe even like kind of lefty people who just haven't like gotten there yet. But like, you know, the idea of mutual aid and charity and yeah, I guess mutual aid and charity like only going so far, you know, because like if I give all my money away to everyone I see on the street, like that's going to be a drop in the bucket, you know, like we have to actually redistribute wealth from all classes. It can't just be based on people's generosity and, you know, what available resources they have. So I feel like I'm not sure I totally have grasped the freedoms of whether this is positive or negative, but when we're talking about like what would be unavailable without raising taxes, like I don't think we can eliminate poverty without doing it under the system we have.
Yeah, for sure. I think like that would be like a negative freedom. So like you don't have to be afraid of being in poverty if we were to raise the taxes and use those taxes to redistribute it to the lower class. So that's definitely something that we're thinking about. And other things that kind of come to mind is like if we were to raise taxes, we would also be able to afford universal health care. That's a really big thing. If we were to, so that would be the freedom to go, a positive freedom to go to the hospital and not have to worry about paying a bill that you can't afford or living in debt for medical bills. Another thing that really comes to mind is if we were to raise taxes, like we would be able to afford a universal income, kind of what both you and both Blake and Nicholas kind of were kind of going at. I know UBI is not necessarily like redistributing like the means of production, and I think we'd really like to see that in a leftist space, but I think that is like a really good first start. Another thing that we could do if we were to raise taxes, we would be able to afford free college and universities. So like there's a lot of different like freedoms that we can do by raising taxes on the rich. And an important thing to kind of point out when we're talking about these discussion is like the freedoms that a lot of us are talking about, all of that is enjoyed by the rich right now. So the rich really don't have to worry about going to a hospital and worry about paying a bill that they can't afford. The rich don't need to worry about going sending their kids to college and not being able to afford the tuition. So that's like something that we can really think about. Nicholas, did you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, I just had like a thought on the previous thing and wanted to go back to that previous question of how the state helps maintain like capitalist control over the means of production. When the state inserts itself into reproductive decisions, it can do so in two ways. One, it can say you can take a rights-based approach and deny people the right to make certain reproductive decisions, either the freedom to make a choice about receiving certain reproductive health care, either whether that's birth control, abortion, or just using condoms. Like people and making like safe sex decisions, the state can step in to deny those things by, if it says, okay, well, we don't want to provide, we don't want those items to be shipped in to the country. We're going to put a tariff on it. We're going to put a ban on the importation of those products, and allowing, and in doing so, when they restrict reproductive freedoms, they're also supporting capitalist control over the means of production, because part of production is the reproduction of the worker, and being able to reproduce more people who can provide labor and labor services. And when you take away the working class's control over the ability to make reproductive healthcare choices, it becomes a matter of cost rather than a matter of do you have the ability to go and pay to drive somewhere where drive or fly somewhere, or go to another country where it is legal, which the working class generally would not have that ability, but the capitalist class could continue to make those decisions themselves, because they would have the ability to pay for access to those things, even when those rights are taken away. So that was just kind of related to both questions, I think.
For sure, yeah. Don, did you want to add something?
Yeah, being a child of the 50s, I remember the days when education was cheaper, healthcare was universal or nonprofit anyway. Nixon created it to be prop. It's basically, and we wouldn't have to raise taxes so much. I mean, for the wealthiest, it was 90% tax rate. So, but for the common guy, it wasn't so high as it is relationally today. And so it's not a matter of raising taxes on everybody. We should always emphasize this, only on the richest should pay their fair share. And then it could go down. Plus, if you had a conscientious Congress and president, you would have laws that say, that would say the Pentagon budget will be cut by so much, and all that money will go to universal basic income, and it'll go to universal health care, and we could afford all that stuff again. We can afford it now without it raising on any of our incomes, but maybe for the 1% wealthy, 10% and 1% on up, you're going to pay a higher percentage. It's just it's a willpower thing. It's kind of like we've proven that charity from individuals is not enough to cover the basic inequalities. And so we have to mandate a social conscience, because there is none in Congress, and probably with the populace as well. I mean, I give as much as I can because of the right now the pandemic, and that I hate to see friends suffer. So I'm giving a lot more than I would normally, but to me, it's like, damn it, I can't see my friends suffer, but they're my friends. I'm not going out doing too much. Yeah, I do as much other charity, but also I can't give as much as I want politically to candidates I want to see change things, because to fight the Nazis. And to me, I'm a fighter, and I ran political campaigns. I'm a politico. I want to see some, and you guys should be feeling it a lot more urgently, because it's your future. My future is almost, I have time's running out. But you guys should be, the fire should be in your belly to bring about change as fast as you can. And, I'm doing all I can financially, but that's not enough, so we have to change the rules, or, so anyway, I just wanted to point out that our taxes don't have to go up. It's the 1%, because I remember I went to school at ICC, $7 a credit hour. I was making $1.10 an hour, minimum wage at a pizzeria, going to ICC, driving a brand new MG midget. Folks, I'm just saying, you didn't, it was a whole different mindset back then. But things have gotten corrupt since. That's all.
Something I want to add that kind of goes back to the first question. I think one of the biggest reasons, I shouldn't say one of the biggest, one of the ways that our government supports maintaining capitalist control is through propaganda. Because so much we see like working class people fighting against their own interests, right? Like an example of that would be like wanting to defund Planned Parenthood, like we were talking about access to women's health care, you know? I forgot what I was saying, but that's my point.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point too, because I remember like sitting in like high school in those counselor meetings and like, or those counselor rooms and seeing that sign that says work harder. And it's like, no matter how hard I work, I'm never going to be part of the 1% unless like I have some kind of extreme luck or I have generational wealth. So
Right.
that's definitely a really good point. And kind of to build off of what Don was saying too, like part of what he said is that kind of stuck out to me is that people say that charity is enough. Just a quick story. Like I work with super conservative people and I absolutely hate it, but I debate with them constantly because I'm very annoying. But one thing that the vice president of sales of my company told me once is that when I was talking about like, because he's super religious, and he was saying I was trying to tell him that like Jesus would be a socialist. So like I was just trying to make that argument with him, just messing with him. And then he said like Jesus said that you should just do charity. And I'm like, I'm thinking in my head, like, were taxes even around during that time period? I mean, like how would he know? Like, I don't know. It's just it's a stupid point that I think that, Republican evangelicals or evangelical or people like point out all the time, like, or that try to debate, like charity is not enough at all. So I agree with Don on that point 100%. And also the idea that like ICC was $7 a credit course, that's insane to me considering like my classes were like $500 each this semester. So that's a huge gain. But kind of moving on to the next point, and this is something that I think like Nicholas, do you want to add something real quick?
No, I'll just go ahead and move on.
Okay. So kind of like, I think everybody's kind of brought up something about this a little bit. And the one slight problem with taxation, and McCarthy even kind of mentions this, is that taxation doesn't necessarily mean redistributed downward. So we see the government spending taxes on subsidizing development for large corporations. That's one of the reasons why the argument socialism is when no iPhone doesn't work, is because part of the reasons why these corporations are able to develop is because they have grants by our government to help them develop, to help them pay for engineers, to help them pay for the ability to research different topics. We see that with Tesla all the time. Another one is spending billions on the military industrial complex, like Don pointed out. And I think Nicholas even pointed out as well. We spend over 50% of our budget on the military, and I've gone over this a ton before, but the military helps large corporations or multinational corporations protect their capitalist interests or international. We see that with Latin America. We've seen this in Middle East, especially with Afghanistan and Iran. And another thing is that it bails out firms whenever there's an economic crisis happen. And even when that economic crisis is caused by the firms who they're bailing out. And it's 2008 financial crisis when they built out all the banks that caused it. So my question is kind of a difficult one, but I wanted to see what your guys' thoughts would be is, how do we fix this problem? How do we, because like, and if you can think locally, but if not, also think nationally, how do we fix the problem? Because I honestly have no idea of this issue where even if we were to raise taxes, we are not guaranteed that those taxes will be redistributed downward. And we see that because I think a lot of the issues is like, lobbying, but I wanted to see what your guys' thoughts on that issue is.
So here's a thought that I came across recently. With our government, we vote for the politicians who go into office, but we don't actually vote on the issues. I think maybe letting people vote on the individual issues, like what certain taxes are used for, could be a good start, because it would take more power away from, I guess, the ruling class in a sense, where like who gets elected to a degree is very gate kept within people who are not working class, right? And that could be a way to give us more power and let our voices be heard more.
Blake?
I'm gonna build off that in a minute, but I'm looking for a source. So come back to me. Let Nicholas go first.
Nicholas?
Okay, that works because mine's a response. So yeah, and to build off of what was said by Emma, like when we have people who are elected, those elected officials are, you mentioned gatekeeping of the elected officials. And that is really the people who we get to choose between are two capitalists almost always.
Yeah.
And so the way in which we are selecting those people, it often comes down to who is the party going to get behind? Who are they going to give the most resources to get this person's message in front of the most people, and to help lift up their voice and what that person is pushing forward. And so what has happened is, while we see like the two-party system, we have them becoming increasingly divided on certain rights-based issues. Anything that materially benefits the working class, they are almost unanimously voting down. They will never support those things. And so if we want to, we can't just raise taxes on the rich. We also have to take back control of our workplaces, living spaces, and we also have to build working class electoral campaigns that can win and maintain power in those spaces. So, like, did you find your thing?
Yeah. Emma mentioned voting on the issues. I think I've talked about this a little bit before, but last year in Portland, Maine, a coalition kind of led by the DSA chapter there were able to put a bunch of referenda on the table and on the ballot, like all kind of city issues that had like a huge difference. And I believe they won almost all of them. I think they won like 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 6. But we're talking big stuff like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, mandating Green New Deal building codes, banning police use of facial recognition software, establishing rent control, and these all won. I think part of it had to do with like the structure of their government where they were able to do that. I don't think you can do that anywhere, but I've been thinking about that for a long time, like since that happened last November, as like a example to follow of, because with like we talk about this issue of like not being able to control the politicians, so we elect even ones that we like, and the forces of capital like prompting them, or maybe the forces of the establishment or whatever, prompting them to vote against our interests. But one answer to that question is finding these like openings where we can force the issue directly, and use that as an example to follow. I'm gonna post the article in the chat.
Thank you, Blake. Don, I think I saw your hand go up.
Yeah. All right, quick. One local issue. which should be brought up over and over and over again. I know it lost the last time it was brought up in a referendum vote, but was privatization. I mean, well, the privatization of Peoria water supply. That is a nonsensical. I don't know how it lost last time, but I know working with Ford in St. Louis, I remember them giving us a report on the expansion of the factory, and one of the big factors they talked about, Ford talked about, was in being able why they stayed in St. Louis for a short while. Later, now it's a 60 acres of other warehouses now, but was the price of water. They use water, and maybe it's because there's not enough heavy manufacturing or whatever water use by corporations in Peoria, but you know that keeps corporations from wanting to invest or come in. You know, if the cost of water. But you know the fact that you guys pay 4 times as much as I pay in Morton, or you know, that's stupid. I don't know, and that should be a real quick, easy win. But somehow people are being bamboozled. That's just one thing where it'd be beneficial.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think another thing that we have to like look at is like, you know, I believe it's happening in Pekin. I can't remember, but like whenever it rains, there's a rain tax, which is insane to me. Just that has to do with the water. So I thought I'd bring it up. That's like ridiculous in my opinion. Sometimes, but anything else that you guys would like to add to this one? Go ahead, Nicholas.
I don't know if you saw the conversations that are happening currently in Beacon, but they're talking about trying to privatize the waste collection.
Really?
And the right wingers are like, you know, basically complaining about the way in which the union that has like its presence in the current way that they're doing things with waste management is they won certain rights. They are and those rights are important for them to be able to do their job safely. But people are complaining because they want to be able to benefit from the exploitation of unsafe working conditions for these workers. And so you're seeing this push that these citizens of Pekin who are very vocal are going in and saying over and over again that they want the city to privatize its waste management, and in doing so, they would be destroying the power of the working class union and increasing unsafe work conditions for them by giving more power to a private corporation to dictate those working conditions. And it doesn't necessarily create a worse service for the city to have those safer working conditions for its workers. But just the fact that there is that push is something that should concern us.
Yeah, for sure. That's I know I think Chicago has a privatized I think they use like waste management or something. So I know it is something that's like very common throughout the United States. And I think some like waste companies like have like 100-year contracts. So like even if they were to like, you know, privatize the garbage can, or the garbage industry, we potentially could have the same one business monopolize it for like 100+ years, which is insane to think about. Blake?
I was actually just talking to Doug last night about both of these things. He said that Peoria waste collection is privatized, which I didn't know. And also we were talking about the water. Apparently that comes up every 5 years, and we both think that that's something we should organize behind. Like, so if we think it happened in either 2018 or 2019, so we've got plenty of time. We could do like a whole year of, I think it's 2018. It was before I was in the chapter, but we could do like a whole year of research and like just kind of I don't know, presentations, community outreach, just like introducing the idea before it's even like on the ballot, right? And I feel like there could be a pretty broad coalition of people who would be interested, because you have like the environmental impact. So you have like environmentalists, you obviously have labor, you obviously have socialist left-leaning people, and then you just have like basic, consumer citizens who don't want their water bill to be insanely high. It seems like a winnable issue that would have a big impact and like, build socialist politics in Peoria. So yeah, just wanted to talk about that since it came up.
The water thing also just brings up a personal thing that I deal with right now. I can't drink my water in Peoria. And the state of Illinois has dictated that corporations like Illinois American Water are gonna have to, whoever provides the maintenance for those systems is gonna have to pull out the lead service lines that are installed. That was something that, when we go back to that question of how does the state prop up capitalists, they dictated that corporation, like the lead pipe corporations were lobbying the government to make it to where part of building code was you had to install a lead pipe to meet building codes. And so everybody had no choice but to install a lead pipe. And so then they profited from the lead pipes, and then they hid research for years, kind of like they're doing with climate change now, where this was showing that it was causing really massive negative health problems for people. In this house that I moved into, I have a lead pipe in my basement. I can't drink my water. I can't cook with my water. It just wouldn't be safe to do so. But for the longest time, like, they are just saying we're not gonna do it. And then they pushed and pushed and pushed and said, well, we need to have time to implement a plan to do this. And they're not even the ones that are going to have to pay for it. And so if they are like not going to do it because it's not profitable to them, like, it's something that I would really like to see the government remediate the problem. And I'm glad that they've passed this law in Illinois. We're actually, I think, the first state in the country to do something like this. And so it's a huge deal, but it's really important for Peoria and Chicago, because Peoria, there was a report, I think in 2016, that showed like we have some of the highest density of lead piping in the country, and we have some of the highest rates of lead poisoning in children. And that is part of one of the things that, like, we need to talk about lead, is that it causes damage to parts of the brain that regulate your ability to regulate your emotions, to make sound decisions, and risk management. And a lot of areas where they've removed lead pipes, you have seen violence go down, violent crime, the assaults, gun deaths, knife fights, all of that stuff. that goes down significantly over the course of 20 plus years, because you're not having children who are having damage to the areas of their brain that are making it more difficult for them to make decisions about risk, and then because of that, it's not like a cure-all. You still got to solve issues of poverty. You still got to solve issues of trauma, but it is something that has been shown to help reduce those problems. And we deal with so many of those issues here in Peoria that it is an important step in addressing that, especially in the schools, because I can pretty much guarantee that in some of our schools, we probably also have lead service lines to the water.
That's an excellent point. I didn't actually know about the effects of lead pipes on how the brain functions. That's a really good point, Nicholas. And to kind of go off of what Blake was talking about with the coalition, I think that's an awesome idea. I would love to do that and be a part of that whenever you guys like start to kind of formulate that. Another thing that I would like to kind of point out with Nicholas is, with our YDSA, that's something that we can like look at as far as like partnering with some of the other clubs on campus. I think you said SAFE is that the environmental group on there? So I think that's a huge thing as well. Yes, I agree. It should be chapter wide. But would anybody like to add anything else to this? Going once, going twice, sold. All right, so that kind of concludes my presentation. If anybody would like to bring up anything else or add anything or add a question that you guys had, this is the time. If not, then yeah, have a good night.